allowing us to support you. So a massive thanks to Google, CBA, IAG, Facebook, KFC Global, O-Media, and American Express. And remember, if you want to play a part in helping deliver leadership skills to Australian marketers, then we can have a conversation with you on how you can help us. On that note, nominations for the 2021 cohort are now open. And for those that want to try and be part of that cohort in 2021, just go to our website for further details. There is another virtual campus next Thursday, October the 1st at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, where award-winning entrepreneur Daniel Priestley talks about the secret of oversubscribed brands. But now for today's session, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Bram Connolly. Bram, who is the author of The Commando Way and other titles, is Australia's leading military fiction author, podcast host, and leadership and resilience consultant. The best way to describe your journey today with Bram is to hear a quote from Brigadier Mark Smethurst, former Deputy Commander, Special Operations Command. He says the Commando Way is a gritty review of his exceptional life in the military during an exceptional period of modern history. His raw description of his military experiences and the hard lessons he has learned can be applied to people currently serving in the military and to those trying to find their way through corporate life. He adds he would recommend the Commando Way to aspiring leaders of all stages. You will have an opportunity to ask Bram questions through the presentation or at the end of the presentation. So now let's please welcome Bram Connolly.
Thanks, Terry. Who put the spotlight video on me? That's terrible. Let's take that off. Alrighty. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to everyone for giving me your time. My definition of done for today is that I would have passed on to some of you a few hard-fought lessons on leadership primarily, but perhaps also some life skills just based on self-mastery and team mastery. So first of all, Marketing Academy, full of very creative people. And I'm not in any way am I concerned about that, even as an ex-Special Forces guy, because I was harboring a secret the whole time I was in the Army, and that was that I was actually pretty creative myself. And that seemed to come about when I was in the headquarters of the Special Operations Command, and the general would ask me to write, a proposal to send the Special Air Service Regiment and the 2nd Commando Regiment guys on operations somewhere in the world, and I would come back with an 80,000 word sort of booklet full of pictures and schematics and views on how we would achieve that, and take great pleasure in putting all of these things together. And so I realized after I left the military that in fact it was creativity was the thing that I was craving more than the action perhaps. Feel free to chuck any questions my way as we go through the next 45 odd minutes. I'll start now and then go back to the start. So I've recently written this book. It's called The Commando Way, and it really is about human optimization, leadership, and resilience. And it's based on my life story. And the working title for this book was, in fact, The Risk of Being Average, which is what the working title for 4 years, The Risk of Being Average. And I came up with that title because here I was, a guy of, pretty average looking guy, I guess, average intelligence, average physical ability. And somehow I'd ended up in the 2nd Commando Regiment as a corporal, as a sergeant, then a captain. I was in the National Counter-Terrorism team, and then I was leading soldiers in combat in Afghanistan. And I felt like, well, if an average guy like me can do that, then an average male, female, anywhere should be able to do that. And it wasn't until my publisher started reading through the book, and every sort of 4 or 5 days, she'd send me another text or a message going, oh my God, how did you survive that? Or, oh my God, how did that happen? That I started to realize that perhaps it wasn't about me being average. Perhaps I wasn't exactly average, but there was something inside the way that we operate, the way that we train, the way that we set ourselves up and expect excellence. I guess that can be encapsulated in something I put on Instagram today, actually, which is, you know, if you do the easy things, then you have a hard life. But if you do the hard things, then you have an easy life. And that seemed to permeate the whole way through this book, The Commando Way. But yeah, I just wanted to start by letting you know that actually the risk of being average was initially the title. So I'm not a complete twat. I do have a little bit of humility. And my life journey, as far as leadership goes, really did start with a book, actually. So I'll take you on a little story. I was in the 1st Battalion up in Townsville in the early 1990s, just showing my age. And as you do as a young soldier, I defrauded the system and told them I was going to be flying home for Christmas in Adelaide. And I took the money that they would have given me for a flight, and I actually drove a hire car home. There's no police in the audience, is there? And so I went back home for Christmas leave, and the $1,800 that they'd given me 2 weeks before payday, I got home on the Friday, and by the Monday morning, I'd spent all that money on alcohol and chasing girls around the city. And then we got a telegram saying, oh, hey, Bram has to report back to, or Private Connolly has to report back to Townsville because we're going to Somalia. And so, you know, I had to go and see my dad, my heart and my hand sort of thing, and say, well, cap in my hand and say, hey, listen, I need some money for a bus fare back to Townsville because I don't have the money for the airfare. Anyway, and so Dad gave me the money. I went and got on a Greyhound bus. And if you can imagine the bus, it had, you know, we started driving about 6 at night. And by the time we got to Tailem Bend, it was 8:30. And there was an old grandma with purple hair in the seat in front of me. There was someone behind me who I think was a shearer. There was all these different people all going north in this bus. And we pulled into the service station, and I went and had a look. In the service station. I had all these books lined up. And one of these books that I saw was a leadership book. And I thought, I'm going to need that book. I'm going to Somalia. I'm going to need a leadership book. So I grabbed this book, this old ratty book, got back in the bus. And then I read that book for the next, 3 days really, between Adelaide and Townsville. And then we got off the bus in Townsville, started to go through all the build-up training, and I kept reading the book. And then I became known as the young guy who was reading the leadership book the whole time. Then we got on to actually deploying to Townsville. So we got on, you might have seen some of the photos of the Qantas aircraft that landed at Mogadishu airport. And a few of us getting off the aircraft with slouch hats and backpacks. And what you won't see is any weapons, because the Australian Army hadn't been to war since Vietnam. So we forgot that you needed rifles in your hand as you got off an aircraft. And all those weapons were in the hold of the aircraft. And then we walked down the steps and we got onto the tarmac, and we're walking across the tarmac. Now, the other people that didn't get the memo about us not having weapons were the Somalis. So they started to come towards us in vehicles with 50 cal machine guns on the back of them. And their playbook's a little bit different than ours. Their playbook is when a big white aircraft lands with a massive red tail and a white kangaroo, you shoot at it. And so that started to occur. And then we all started to run around the tarmac with no weapons, and I hit the ground and slid somewhat on the pavement. And then I remember these two guys were looking at me, and they're like, Bram, what do we do? And so I've pulled this like leadership book out of my pocket and started flipping through the pages. And I'm trying to find the bit, you know, what do you do when you're getting shot at by Somalis who are shooting at your aircraft? Now, the Qantas pilots, they also had a completely different playbook. Their playbook was start the aircraft and go. So all the bags are getting thrown out the back. The Qantas aircraft is flying off down the runway. I'm laying there looking through this book. Somalis are shooting at us, and the American Special Forces luckily came and saved us. But anyway, just as that was occurring, I looked over at the guys and I put the book in my pocket and I said, run! And so we ran. And we ran to the nearest building and we hid until the Americans saved us. But anyway, what was interesting for me at that point was I knew every single word in this leadership book, and I thought I could pretty much get us through anything. But when the push come to shove, I actually had to go back to basic instincts of survival. There wasn't anything in that book that was telling me how to do this. And I had to, and interestingly, 20 years later in Afghanistan, I had something very similar happen. And I did the same thing because, I've been here before. I know what to do at this point because I've learnt this. And so I think it is with storytelling and why I wrote this book is I think you have more understanding of a situation when you can immerse yourself in it in your mind's eye based on the experience of someone else that's been there rather than a concept or a theory, but actually to hear a story. And that's what I want to do for the rest of today really is to tell you a few stories, things that I discovered the hard way. And so you as potential and future and current leaders can think about that story and reflect on it and then use the skill out of that story. But is there any questions about that initial introduction before I go on? I've noticed a few cameras turning off, so I'm assuming you're all going to start drinking. Oh, good. Yeah, all right. So not long after Somalia, I found myself in 1997 on my second attempt at selection course for Special Forces, having failed the first one. And this is in the book, but having failed the first one and then going back to the unit and telling everyone that I'd withdrawn from injury when actually I just withdrew because I wasn't tough enough. And it wasn't for a few months until I was found out from a person who was actually there that I realised that I had to own that I really had to own that failure, because if I didn't own that failure, it was going to define me for the rest of my life. And it was such an empowering moment to start to tell people the truth rather than to live this lie of the expectations that I'd built for myself that was so difficult. So a few years later, I was back on selection course, and now I was there as a corporal. I had my own team of 9 people. And early one morning, I'll set the scene for you. It's in a little place. I'm not sure if you guys would be aware of this place. It's called Lithgow. And Lithgow in winter is not the wonderland I thought it was going to be. Anyway, we got out of our stretchers in the morning. We were told to put our packs on, and we all lined up, and we had to walk up over this mountain at the back of Lithgow and then and get to the top of a hill, and we would wait, and then we would continue to keep going. And so anyway, halfway through, it's now 6 o'clock in the morning, winter, Lithgow. There's an orange sunrise. It's been raining through the night. There's all the cockatoos and everything in the trees. And there's like, you know, the fog coming out of your mouth and the mist rising off your wet shoulders from putting effort in for half of the night walking. So we'd walk 10 kilometres, my platoon. Anyway, this vehicle starts to drive up a track. We could hear it started and it was coming. We could hear it for about 5 kilometres. And it slowly came up this track. And it was a Series 3 Land Rover. And it parks at the top of the hill where we were. And out gets Hans Fleer, Major Hans Fleer. Now, Hans Fleer, I'm shivering now thinking about him. We used to call him the Dark Lord or the Sith or the Iceman. He was terrifying. He's 6'4", 60-year-old guy. His cams were absolutely pristinely ironed, and he was an SAS Vietnam veteran and had killed more men than cholera, so the story goes. In fact, cholera was scared of him. And anyway, he gets out of the vehicle and he stands up, and even the cockatoos went silent. They went completely silent. And he takes a few steps and he stops and he looks over towards where my platoon is and he yells out, "Lieutenant Crisp." And my platoon commander sort of looks around. He's like, "Oh my God, he wants me." And he stands up and Lieutenant Crisp walks over to him. And Major Fleer says to him, "Lieutenant Crisp, tell me the name of your platoon sergeant." Now, we'd been together for about 1.5 years, this platoon, in 4th Battalion. And what Lieutenant Crisp didn't realise is that Hans Fleer didn't have that nodule of DNA that can sense humour. And so what he said was, "Oh, well, it's Sergeant, sir." And so I could see, and, you know, Hans Fleer's looking at him like one of those cyborgs looks at a target. And then he looks at him and he says, "Tell me one of the names of your corporals." And he's like, "Oh, well, there's Corporal Pridmore, Corporal Connolly, and Corporal K." And then Hans Fleer's voice starts booming over the valleys, this Hungarian sort of accent. He's like, "Tell me the names of any of their wives, their partners, their children. I don't care if you tell me their dogs, just give me something, Crisp." And Lieutenant Crisp's shoulders just sunk and he had nothing, he didn't know. And Hans Fleer puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "Go and get your pack, Lieutenant Crisp." Lieutenant Crisp walks over to the group and he picks this pack up. And he looked at me and he looked me in the eyes, and his eyes looked like I could, you know, you would imagine a dead man. He was already dead, his soul was gone. And he walked over to the vehicle and he threw his pack in and he got in the vehicle. And Hans stood there with his big hands on his hips and he just looked out over the valley. He didn't look at us, he looked past us over the valley for about 3 or 4 minutes for dramatic effect. And then he turned around, he got in the vehicle and the vehicle took off and the noise disappeared. We never ever saw Lieutenant Crisp again, ever. Like, never. We don't know if he's alive to this day. If anyone knows where Lieutenant Crisp is. But anyway, we were there for a few minutes and we were all sitting around, and the sergeant of the platoon is looking around and he's like, "Okay, well, now I'm in charge." So he's trying to work out where we're going to go next. And then Corporal Pridmore comes over to me and he goes, "G'day, mate, my name's Kane, how are you?" I said, "G'day, Kane, how are you?" "I'm Brown." He goes, "Oh, look, my wife's name's this, my kids' names are this, my dog's this." And so it went with the whole platoon. Everyone got together and they all, for about 15 to 20 minutes, we'd been together for 1.5 years and no one knew each other's names. We knew each other by Jono and, you know, Carl and, you know, not first names. It was all jokes. But Hans Fleer had this way of making you see a lesson and then never talking about it again. And I'm glad that he did, because one of the guys in that platoon, some, 12 years later, would be in the sister platoon to the one that I was in command of and was killed in Afghanistan. And I knew that guy intimately, and I knew his family, and I knew his children, I knew everything about him. And while that didn't make the loss any easier, it certainly made it a lot easier when someone was at the door to tell that family, "Hey, this has happened." That interaction as a leader, that knowing your people, that getting to know people more, because we spend most of our life at work. We don't spend much of our life at home. It's usually always at work. And yet they're the people that we don't seem to invest the time in that we really should. And, so that story had a profound effect on me at the time that it happened. And then years later, when that actual, that series of events came to a conclusion and made me a better person. And the thing I talk to companies about when I go into businesses and talk about leadership in particular is about the empathy, the missing link of leadership. The thing that just doesn't seem to exist. We want to talk about, delegative and participative and directive leadership styles, but bloody hell, do we ever talk about empathy? Being an empathetic leader. We talk about, servant leadership, but we don't talk about the empathy that's required. And I had this thing recently where I was sitting in a cafe and I really didn't want to do this presentation I was about to do. And I was sitting there going, if people knew what I was carrying around at the moment today, because today's just a crappy day for me and I'm scheduled in to do this thing. And I thought, I'm wearing this bloody invisible backpack that's full of profound experiences and loss and heartbreak and the other things, I dropped a custard tart as I sat at the table. Even that was, I looked down on the ground and I was like, I'm done, you know, like I was thinking about this backpack I was carrying around and I just dropped this custard tart on the ground. Anyway, I had my coffee and that solved everything. But I looked at this escalator going up and down BHP, up and down inside BHP. And then I started to think to myself, I wonder if everyone else is wearing that backpack, if everyone else has that invisible backpack on and they're all carrying it around with them. And so I started, and I do this. This is what I do. This is why I wrote military fiction, because I'm a creative. I like to sit there and visualize things and then change it and explain it. And so I went into that workshop, and the first thing I did is I put a slide up that I'd put together in the cafe that said, tell me what's in your invisible backpack. And all these people, this stuff that came out, I was like, oh my God, we're all a mess. And it was interesting because then when I start talking to leaders about leadership and I say, hey, let me tell you something really important. Leadership is about place, right? Leadership is about place. And I'm not talking about the physical location where Terry, Emily, Ben, Lisa, Dan, any of you are, right? That's all physical place. That's part of it. I'm here, you're there. That's part of it. But the place is what you're carrying in that backpack on any particular day. So if you had been, you know, if you'd been here last night and you'd seen one of my kids hit a cricket ball into that wine room window and crack it, the place where I'm at today is not as good as the place I could be at. Let me just tell you that, right? Whereas if you'd had a great day on the way into work and you'd listened to, you know, Joe Rogan's podcast and he had talked to your soul and now you were thinking about, you know, experimenting with DMT or something, I don't know, right? And you're like, this is going to be the best day ever. And the two of us meet in the middle and I'm the leader and you're the subordinate. Those two places are profoundly different. Now, if that one person, remove that person, you put another person there, the place they're coming from is different. And it's all about these backpacks, these invisible backpacks, and meeting people at the place where they're at and asking people, hey, how are you? What is it? Why can't you bring 100% to the conversation we're about to have? Do you know, I usually start my conversations with that. Now, I was going to start today with that, but I thought I'd draw it out a bit. Because, and I'm wrapping a whole heap of concepts in these one long story, because the resource, the thing that's the hardest to find, the rarest, scarcest thing on earth is someone else's attention. It's not palladium. It's holding someone's attention. And if you're good enough to hold someone's attention for a while, then you're good enough to get your leadership message across to them. And this is the other thing. If someone's standing in front of you and they're this guy or girl, right? They're looking over here and you're talking to them and they're doing this, just walk away. It's not worth your time because you can't hold their attention because they don't want to give it to you. So attention is one of the rarest resources on earth. The way that we get someone's attention is we speak to their source code. So we speak to the thing that is the absolute underlying thing that can hold their attention. We wonder what's in their backpack, and you have to meet the moment. And by that, what I mean is a leadership experience doesn't start today when I tell you to do this. If you think leadership starts by me saying to Mitchell, hey mate, you've got to work longer on the weekend to finish this assignment for us so that we can do whatever, and I'm asking him at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and I'm going to get a good outcome out of that, incorrect. That's not when that's not when leadership starts. Leadership starts way back when you were sitting on your backpack and you introduced yourself for the first time to someone before you were even a leader together. So it starts all the way back here. And the beauty of leadership is that, first of all, you'll never ever get there. You'll never ever be good at this. Not as good as you want to be, ever. It's down there. And you're chasing it. I mean, I do this for a living and I'm no good at it. What hope do you have, right? But that's the beauty of it. You walk outside your door today and you're given a gymnasium. There's a whole gymnasium out there for you to actually train on your leadership. Every time you order coffee from a barista, that's leadership. One person's doing something for another, the other person's paying them something, but there's an interaction. You get to choose. How do you meet that moment? When something's happening on a bus and you set up and let someone sit down, it's leadership. Probably the absolute rawest form of this is when you have kids and you're trying to get them to do something you want them to do because they want to do it, which, by the way, is Simon Sinek's leadership quote. Trying to get someone to do something because they want to do it. When you try and do that with children, everything's stripped away. There's no more authority. You don't have any authority anymore, really. You're just the mum or dad or the auntie or uncle or the caregiver. You're whatever you are. But you don't have any, there's nothing there you can do. And you can't hit them, right? You can yell, but it doesn't actually, if the minute you yell, you've lost the argument in any situation. And so it's the rawest form of leadership. But you've got this gymnasium as you walk out the door to test all these leadership theories. As you're walking down the street, look at people. Actually look at them. And look at the backpacks they're carrying. You've got no idea what people are carrying around. And I've run over 100 leadership workshops in the last year and a half. And every time we answer that question, I'm amazed. Everyone knows someone who's committed suicide. Everyone knows someone who's died of cancer. Everyone is upset at something. But it's our job as leaders to bring them through that and beyond. Through that and beyond. And you can only do that if you're empathetic to the backpack. All right, let me move on. So I think I want to tell you a story as well while I've got the time about communication and communicating as a leader. I make no apologies for the fact that it's yet another army story. Book's actually full of them. But in 2010, I took my little platoon of 30 special forces guys. And oh, by the way, I'm 5'11" and 85 kilo. And all those guys were over 100 kilo and 6 foot. So whatever I was doing, it never turned into a mutiny and no one ever took over from me. There was no alpha male stepping up going, "Let me take over." And I think that the reason for that is because as a leader, you always want to be someone's best hope. Their best hope at getting something done, their best hope at being successful, the best hope at the person that can put the vision together for the team. Or in this case, for my soldiers, the best hope of survival. Now, we drove down from from Tarankout down to Kandahar. And so that's about a 500 kilometre drive. And halfway there is a forward operating base the Americans had called FOB Frontenac, so Forward Operating Base Frontenac. And my 15 vehicles, with all of our partner force, Afghan partner force, we rock up to this base and it's just on must have been mid-afternoon. We drove through the big steel gates. And if you can imagine, the base is a huge battalion base, and then there's nothing but desert and then mountain ranges 20 kilometres away. I go into the Tactical Operations Centre, and I see the American colonel in there. So you've got this Australian Special Forces captain at the time, an American colonel. And I'm like, "G'day, sir, how are you? Captain Connolly, from Australia." And here we are. And he's like, "God damn," whatever they talk. He's like, "Listen, good to have you here. Great that you can come and refit your vehicles. Tonight, make sure you sleep in your vehicles because we get rocketed every night." And I sort of said, "What? What do you mean?" They have these big, beautiful hangars we could sleep in with air conditioning. And we wanted us to sleep in our armoured cars. And he said, "We get rocketed every night. It's coming from out there somewhere. Can you, make sure you're in your vehicles?" And I said, "Well, why don't you patrol out there? Why don't you take your vehicles out there and you go and set up an ambush or clear?" And he looked at me like I was the stupid Australian, right? He's like, "Well, there's IEDs out there. We'll get blown up." I said, "Okay, well, why don't you walk?" And then he really thought I was stupid because Americans don't walk anywhere, right? And then I said, "Listen, there's two things Australian Special Forces really like doing, and one of them is fighting. So can we go out there and see if we can solve the problem?" And he said, "Yeah, fill your boots, crack on." I said, "Okay, no." So I went and briefed my platoon, who were all about it. That night, we put some ladders up against the wire. We climbed over the barbed wire. You should have seen the American guy in the gun tower. He's sort of like, "What on earth? All these Australians in cams and their night vision climbing over the fence into no man's land." And off we went. And so we had about five meters between each other. And so if someone stepped in an IED, it wouldn't kill everyone around them. And we just started patrolling off towards the mountains. And we'd been walking from about 9 at night, and it must have been about 1 in the morning. And when we left, it was 40 degrees, and it was now about 2 degrees. It was freezing. And I've got a thing in my ear. Oh, and we love carrying ammunition and weapons and guns and knives and stuff, and not much food and not much water. So it was very heavy. And we had left really hot. Now it's really cold, and we're all sweating, and we're basically dying of hypothermia. And I've got this earpiece in this ear here, and it's let's call him Carl. He's an American Predator drone pilot who's actually based in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, but his aircraft comes out of Kandahar. And we knew each other really well. I knew about his kids and the fact they played hockey and all this other stuff, and he knew about, he knew about my stuff. And because I talked to him every night on this, whenever we went patrolling, this guy would come down and we formed a relationship. Anyway, walking along, and Carl comes in my ear, and he's like, I could hear the crackling, and there's a bone microphone, and then he goes, "Bram!" And I'm like, "Yeah, Carl." And he goes, "There's a couple of Taliban in the rocks up ahead." I'm like, "Okay, how far?" And he said, "I think it's about 400, 500 meters." I'm like, "Okay." So this drone is at 20,000 feet. Nothing can hear it. This laser comes down out of the drone and circles around this rock to show me where they are. And I can see it through my night vision. And then the laser goes and disappears again. It's like the finger of God. And I said, "Oh, yeah, got it. Thanks, Carl. I sort of knew what you meant. It's the only rocks in front of me, but anyway, whatever." And then I decided, and this is the thing, right? I give the hand signal. Everyone can see through the night vision goggles, and we'll stop. Now, we don't all have radios in between each person because, well, we do, but we don't use them because if someone presses on the wrong thing or someone talks and you've got this huge frontage, then if there's enemy around them, they'll hear it. So all our radios are off. So it's my job, just everyone goes down, they're all covering out. My job is to go all the way down that line of men. "Hey, listen," go to the first one. "Hey, listen, forward scouts, there's a couple of enemy up in front. Carl thinks there might be some more behind them. Perhaps we're about to get ambushed, I'm not sure. But here's my plan. And here's what I'm going to do at this time at 4 a.m. And if that doesn't work, then this is what I'm going to do. So here's the 3 things." And they're like, "Yeah, got it, boss, no worries." Okay. And then I walk down to the next person in line. And then I walk past that next person because that's where I was. And then I go to the next person. And then the next person. And then the next person. And then the next person, all the way down the line. 30 guys, 5 meters apart, about 2 minutes per person. It took a long time. And by the time I get almost to the end, just about to talk to the last guy, then the bone mic sort of moves. And I'm like, "Oh, here we go. It's on." And it's Carl, and he goes, "Bram." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "It's okay. It was just a couple of goats. It's all good, mate. Keep going." I'm like, "Okay, thanks, Carl." And I get to the last guy and I go, "Hey, man, it was just a couple of goats. We're gonna keep going." So, "Yeah, okay, boss." So, "Okay, we're leaving in 5. And I get to the next guy, "Hey, there's some goats. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Hey, there's some goats. Leaving in 5 minutes. Hey, keep going back down the line." Don't need to tell this guy because that was where I was. Go to the front 2 scouts and I'm like, "Hey, guys, listen, it was a couple of goats in the rocks. We can keep going now." Like, "Oh, okay, boss." When are we leaving? I look at my watch. So we're leaving now. So they stand up and they start walking. And I am absolutely fragged because I've walked all the way up and all the way down and all the way back, and now we're going. The thing about this, if you don't control the narrative as a leader, if I hadn't have said anything, if I had just sat there, the guys, because they're cold, they're wet, they're hungry, there's the unknown, there's no information that they have, it's all here, it's all in this silo, right? They start making it up. "Oh, the boss has got us lost again." That's probably the first thing they'd say, because I used to do that a bit. "Well, the boss has taken a wrong turn. Someone up ahead might be injured." They just start to control the narrative themselves. And I think that really shows you leadership truly is an energy transference. No one's ever been led by a leader with no energy. It doesn't happen. That's not leadership, it's something else. And that person gets replaced. So leadership is an energy transference, and going up and down that line really is all about giving every person the information that I have at the time that I have it. Communicate everything and communicate often. It's the only way to get the most out of your team, to get people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. The other thing is there was an expectation that I would do that because they'd seen it before. So they don't start rumors. They don't start innuendo. They know that I'm going to come and tell them the information. I don't hide anything. I've got nothing to hide. I'm an open book. It's a really important point. If you don't take anything else from today, take away the fact that I really like coffee and that communicate everything and communicate often. Leadership is an energy transference. And that sort of brings me to, I want to talk about a few other bits and pieces. I'm sort of aware of time as well for you all. When I left the army and started to write these books, it was very difficult. And I wanted to tell you, the Marketing Academy, this in particular, because of who you are and what you're going through at the moment with some of your own businesses or some of the businesses you work for, and because of COVID. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a few people here who probably follow me anyway. If you don't, check out the Warrior You podcast. But one of the things that I quite often say is words become worlds, right? Words become worlds. So if you say something, then it becomes true. It will become true. Just keep saying it and believing it. We used to get told, fake it until you make it. And then some deep-seated psychological underpinnings to that. And it is that words become worlds. Your feelings control your thoughts. Your feelings control your thoughts. Those thoughts become behaviors. Those behaviors end up becoming your actions. And so you can control that by the sort of music you put on. The music I put on in the gym is Britney Spears and others pop songs played by heavy metal bands. It's insanely funny, but there's a really wicked drum beat as well. And it makes me happy. It makes me happy hearing It's Raining Men done by Five Finger Death Punch, right? It's just the thing that makes me happy. And because of that feeling, I then lift more in the gym. Because I lift more in the gym, that's part of my behavior, I get stronger. The action, it perpetuates around in a circle. Words become worlds. So I left the army as a major. I won a Distinguished Service Medal for leadership and action. I looked amazing in green. So for me, that was my persona. That's who I was. And I left at 37 after a 20-year career. And then I walked outside the military. I had no Medicare card. I had never cooked for myself because the mess does that. I'd gone on all of these overseas deployments and I'd learned how to do one thing really well, which is lead, and lead through real traumatic crisis, which is where you're really exposed. And then suddenly I needed to be a new person. And I looked around and I went, right, I'm a military fiction author. And that's what happened. Words became worlds. I went and wrote this book, pitched it, sold it. And I started telling people when they said, hey, what do you do now? Veteran. Friggin' hate that word, by the way. I was like, I'm a military thriller author. I'm an author. And I said it often enough and I said it to enough people that I started getting held to account by it. And it's like, and that was tongue in cheek about the veteran thing, but I want you also to understand what you identify as is what you become. Words become worlds. When we say I'm a veteran, what that means is I'm someone whose career is over. It means I'm someone who society thinks is broken or washed up. When I say I'm an ex-Special Forces major, you all think of that in a completely different light. You look at that as, oh, this guy's got some skill. This guy's got some power. This guy's got some discipline. If I say, oh yeah, I'm an army veteran, it's even the way I'm saying it, it's even so. And then, so you say something enough, words become worlds, write the second book. Say things enough, believe things enough. I thought, okay, well now I'm an entrepreneur. So I started telling people I was an entrepreneur, started building businesses. Now I tell people I'm a podcast host. I've got 100 episodes of the Warrior You podcast where I've interviewed some of the smartest minds around leadership, optimization and resilience. And so I think reinventing yourself is something that we can all do when we're ready to do it. You know, and I think I was just on the cusp of being ready to do it. And I'm so glad that when I did do it, I realized all I need to do is believe. And I was so institutionalized by the army. I had been there for so long in that institution. I'd lived and breathed it, that I had to work out a way to make it, to go cold turkey and be something else, and to take off my body armor. And I don't mean my physical body armor, but I was hiding behind being a major. I was hiding behind, you know, there was 1,000 men in 2 Commando Regiment calling me sir. I mean, that is a big thing to walk away from. And then you walk in and to David Jones and some guy's like, hey dude, what do you want? Oh, I'll have that shirt. Like, it's a completely different world, right? So words become worlds. We can have some questions in a minute. I'll just talk for a little bit longer before we do questions, because I think the other aspect to where I want to go with this, for this group in particular, is around resilience. And, you know, it was something that I think we're all going through at the moment, is being a little bit more resilient. And resilience is an interesting thing. Resilience is what you bring to the party right at this minute, right now. Okay. So if your cat dies, how you relate to the death of that feline will be different today than what it will tomorrow, that it might be the next day or the next day, the next day. And the reason for that is resilience is whatever you're bringing to the party right now. So think about yourself. How much sleep did you get last night, Emma? Right? How much, what's your food intake been like the last couple of weeks from a health standpoint? How much exercise are you doing? How much self-care are you going through? You know, resilience is a little bit epigenetic as well. It's a little bit about what your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents went through. So resilience is whatever you bring to the party right now. But I've got some really great news for you. And that is that you can work on your mental toughness for when the resilience fades. And the mental toughness is a piece you can really work on. And we work on our mental toughness from being physically fit, but also from by putting ourselves through frames of reference for stuff that's really hard. So that when you're faced with a problem where your resilience is now waning, you can look yourself in the eye and go, you know what? I've done something tougher than this. So yeah, I feel a little bit teary, like this, but I can crack on because I'm mentally tough. But if you don't have that mental toughness, then you get to the edge of your resilience, and that's all you have. It's like a bucket. And the good thing about the bucket is there's 2 halves of that bucket. One half's resilience, the other half's mental toughness. And if there's no resilience left, you want to hope you've got the mental toughness in there. And I honestly think it's as easy as this. Get in touch with, and from a leader perspective, you bring your teams to get in touch with the human condition, what it's like to be wet, cold, hungry, what it's like to be outside in the elements. What do you do when it's raining outside? Do you grab a raincoat and the kids and go, let's go for a walk? Or do you turn all the fireplaces on and sit there and wait for it to pass? Or have you challenged yourself? Have you done a marathon? Have you done an Ironman? Have you done a half Ironman? Have you done Olympic distance triathlon? Have you put anything out there that's a lofty goal that maybe you might not reach, but you're going to train for it? Because these are all things that build our mental toughness. Every time you do a run and you feel like walking now and you don't, you're building on that mental toughness. You're giving yourself a new frame of reference. And my career was full of frames of reference for when I'd done something harder. And it's interesting because every time I did something hard, and then I would do something really hard, I go, but that was harder. And then the next time I would be, but that was harder. And it's always that next step of, hang on a sec. And that's why Special Forces, that's why SAS, that's why the Commandos, that's why we have a selection course. That selection course is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's harder than anything I did in Afghanistan. And you know what I did in Afghanistan. And yet that selection course is harder than that. And that's why teams when we talk about teams bonding, they don't bond around a water cooler and donuts. They bond around when they solve a problem together that's hard, when something's worthwhile. And that's why I said to you at the start today, right at the very start, you know, I said to you, you can have a, you know, if you can take the easy way, you'll have a hard life. If you do the hard things, you'll have an easy life. And that's what it is with leadership, with resilience, high-performing teams. And that's me, gang. Are there any questions on what I've talked about for the last 40 odd minutes?
Well, Bram, I have one question. Most of the people here today are in the marketing industry and ultimately are responsible and involved in creative output. And the general feeling in our industry is that really creative work gets better results. But it's also invariably got to have an element of bravery to making the decision to approve work that is on the edge. So they have time to actually think about their bravery. In your circumstance, do you have time to think about being brave, or is it a totally instinctive reaction to a given circumstance?
There's a couple of answers to this. The first one is quite simply that knowledge dispels fear. So one of the scariest things you can do as a 19-year-old when you join the army is to go and parachute out the back of an aircraft. And the knowledge that you are given, the time that you spend on the preparation, the training that you do, all of these things, they take away that, they don't take away the element of fear. But when you stand up at that door and it opens up and you have sensory overload, you really do know, okay, I've done enough. I know, and it's a weird feeling because you're now trusting a process that up until now had been completely theoretical. It may as well have been Leonardo da Vinci that said, hey mate, this will work, give it a crack. It doesn't matter that it was 1,000 other people have done it before you. Until you've done it yourself, it's just theory. So that's one aspect to that. The second one is the way we distinguish Victoria Crosses, and I wrote a guy up for a Victoria Cross. He won a star of gallantry, actually. And it's interesting because stupidity is doing something that everyone else thinks is brave, but you don't realise the consequences of it. Whereas bravery, true bravery, is where you realise the consequences of your actions and you still do it, and you save half a platoon. That's bravery. Stupid people still get Victoria Crosses, don't get me wrong. Anyway, let's not go there.
Okay, well, any other questions for Bram?
I think there was about 1 million. I'll have a look through some of them, see if I can answer. Justin, like the original.
Sorry, mate, I might fire a question at you, mate, if I can. Mark from Media, thanks for today. What about the balance between empathy, just sort of get your views on this. So the balance between empathy and building resilience in your teams, particularly when there's sometimes there's a bit of a generational gap. I think, you know, my grandparents era a bit tougher than us, and I think we're a bit tougher than the kids coming through. So do you have views on the empathy side of things, but needing to build resilience because it is a tough world out there, right?
Yeah, respectfully, I don't agree with you, Mark, about generations being tougher than each other. It's just different. And I'll say that because the Vietnam veterans all told me how tough they were. The World War II veterans all told the Vietnam veterans how tough they were. And I took a bunch of Gen Y to Afghanistan, and I saw them do stuff that you just would not believe, things that we had to do. And so the generational thing, I think, is a cop-out. And as it is with empathy and resilience, they're completely different. So empathy is more about you than it is about the others. It's more about you as a leader and how you meet the moment. If you're the sort of person who meets the moment by hearing to respond, as opposed to listening to hear, then then that person will never get it, right? They'll never understand it. I think there's a lot of people who try and use empathy against you as a leader by saying, I've got all these problems, and I completely get what you're saying if that's where you're going with this. And that's up to a leader to be able to look through the wheat from the chaff and see who are the people that fit the company's cultures and who doesn't. Because it's actually the company cultures that are responsible for having the wrong people there for those leaders anyway. I think companies are getting better and better at having values-based culture and hiring against values, and having employees line up with those values. I hope that sort of in some ways roundabout sort of answers your question. It's a tough question, actually.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, it's great. We see it at O, where we get the right people in, and generally we don't have too many dramas in that sense. Certainly comes up here and there.
Mark, there's a company I work with at the moment where we talk about empathy. They're doing all the right things. Their leaders, they listen, they have great performance plans. There's just some people in that business who are dickheads. There just is. And slowly over time, you've got to weed them out, and they've got to go to other businesses with their tribe.
Agreed.
There's a question here from Cam. Can you talk about the importance of purpose in terms of teams?
Yeah. So what underpins being able to create influence? So getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And for me, it was 36-foot, 100-kilo commandos. In order to get them to do what I want them to do because they want to do it, you use influence. And the way to gain influence is through purpose, motivation, and direction. The thing around purpose for a leader, and what makes a leader different than a manager, and particularly around purpose, is that the purpose is wrapped up in the vision that they can sell. This is the vision for the future. I have a dream, Martin Luther King, where a little black girl and a little white boy can walk hand in hand down a street. Paints a vision for the future. Then the purpose is, this is what I want you to do in that purpose. And you're singling out teams and individuals in that purpose. So you're giving their part of the purpose. Because ultimately what we want team members who are committed, not compliant. If they're just committed, if they're just compliant, then they're just there to do enough to not get fired. They're just there to do enough to get a paycheck. They're just there to do enough always. But if they've got a purpose, now they're committed to that vision and they own it. There's ownership there. At the end of that vision, no matter what it is, whether it's a marketing campaign, whether it's a change management system, whether it's a new piece of equipment off of a conveyor belt, if they've all had a part in that, when they're celebrating that success, they're telling their friends, they're telling their families. And it was all because of the purpose was wrapped up inside the vision. It's crucial.
Okay. Guys, we're approaching the hour mark now, so I think it's probably time to wind up unless there's one last question. No? Okay. Well, in that case, Bram, thank you very much for your insights and wisdom that you've shared with us today. To everyone that attended, thank you very much for attending. And of course, once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Google, CBA, IAG, Facebook, KFC Global, Media, and Amex. And don't forget to join us again at 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 1st of October, to hear from Daniel Priestley. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That wasn't mine.
Thank you, Bram.
Thanks.
That was great.
No worries.
Really great.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. And yeah, we've been sending out the link to your book. So I'll be sending a follow-up on this. And
Thanks.
we'll send a link again